Good afternoon. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with me today. Well, half an hour with me today. I'm Linda Walker. This is Sportsline YXE, and this is our third show. So far, so good. Today, it's all about the pigskin. And I don't mean this kind of pigskin that you can buy as a treat for your puppy, although the puppies I look after really like these. So a tip, if you're looking for a treat for your pet, this is pigskin. I don't know where you find them, but they're out there somewhere. No, we are talking this kind of pigskin. And okay, this isn't really a pigskin either, but it is, and I have to turn off my phone here. Sorry, folks. It is my nephew calling me from Ontario to let me see my two great nieces who are named Isla and Aurora, and they are absolutely adorable. And he doesn't realize that I'm doing a show right now, so I will have to talk to him later. My apologies for that. These are all the technical things that can happen during a show. So no, this is not real pigskin, but you get the gist of what we're going to talk about. CFL, XFL, yes, no, maybe, to help us sort through some of these adventures that are going on right now between The Rock. And I don't have a nickname for Randy Ambrosie. Well, let's see if we can come up with one for him. But I'm going to bring on for you today a superb sports scribe, Rob Vanstone, who writes a column for the Regina Leader Post and the Saskatoon Star Phoenix, has been following the Riders for a couple of years now. Hey, Rob, 2 or 3 years you've been following the Riders?
Well, hi, Linda. Hi, Aurora.
How are you?
The story I like to tell is that I went to my first Rider game in 1963, and I was born in 1964. Because my mom was very pregnant when she took me to my first game, and it was with my mom I started going. So since before I can remember, I've been following the Rough Riders, and so it's pushing. I mean, I really started getting into it in the early 70s, and then 1975 I got completely hooked. So we're talking a while here, as you can tell by my ashen complexion and my my refusal to sit up straight. I apologize for the surroundings. I'm in bed. My wife has control of the living room right now, so I'm upstairs in a very casual setting. So.
Rob, no need to apologize. I'm thrilled to have you on because I know you, like many others, we're all kind of trying to follow what's going on under that cone of silence between the XFL and CFL. And you have written a couple of columns here recently talking about the CFL and what a fabulous game it is, and some of the quality games that have taken place, including, full disclosure, I wanted to reach out and give you a hug when you wrote about what the most exciting football game is that we have seen in this country, and that was that great Vanier Cup contest between McMaster Marauders, my alma mater, and Laval. And so I had to pull this out. The T-shirt that I bought from the Alumni Association after that game. So I had to pull that out today and show it off again, because it has been almost 10 years since that game, and it was a phenomenal game. And we've seen some tremendous Grey Cup games as well versus our friends to the south. And I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I have lots of Pittsburgh Steelers clothing, some hats, whatever. But really, the majority, in my mind, of their Super Bowl games have not matched what we've seen up here in the majority of our Grey Cup games for closeness, excitement, fun, frivolity, So I love this game that we have here in Canada with the 3 downs. And I would hope we're not going to see these wholesale changes to how the game is going to be played here if this merger occurs.
And that's my worry, Linda. And it's I think it's fostered by the lack of precise information emanating from the Canadian Football League headquarters. They said they disclosed their discussions. Pardon me, I'm just trying to sit up a little bit. They disclosed their discussions while basically not disclosing anything. and then said it was in the interest of transparency. Well, there's 320-pound offensive linemen that are more transparent than the CFL has been during this process. We really don't know what it is, and that just perpetuates a lot of the speculation, and I'm sure in some cases misinformation, because people are left to guess. And I'm sure there's some guesswork involved at the CFL level as well. But the fact that so much of this is going on confidentially just breeds fears that may be totally unfounded. But they've, because they won't give us any details, the mind tends to wander and the imagination tends to run wild. And I think as one who's dealt with anxiety a lot too, I know that it's an easy default to the worst case scenario. And after a while, once you start spinning the worst case scenario around in your head, you almost convince yourself that it's going to come to fruition, even if there's in reality an infinitesimal likelihood that it will. So maybe that's what's happening here, and I hope that is what's happening here, because I've seen some dissenters liken it to throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and I think that's as cliched as it is. That's tantamount to what they would be doing if it was to be a sellout to the point where the CFL game as we have known it and loved it is virtually unrecognizable in terms of the way it's played or by whom it is played. And those have to be considered as elements of the game that are in danger when there's nothing even hinting at a denial or a refutation coming from the CFL commissioner and his people. As soon as you allow for the possibility of things changing, and as impervious as some people can be to change, there's going to be that reaction, that alarmed reaction, and that's what we're seeing. And maybe I'm overreacting, but they've certainly given people the grounds to overreact, given the virtual lack of information that's been coming. And if you merge with the XFL and become a 4-down league with a smaller field, you're just another football league, and the NFL is going to win that one. If you watch Canadian football and then suddenly Canadian football becomes American football, why not just watch American football performed by the best in the world? If there's no differentiation between the NFL and the CFL, where's the CFL's niche? And that is what I'm worried, that they're too eager to abandon it. And yes, these are times of desperation. By all means, talk with the XFL and look for alternatives, new revenue streams, even a means of survival. But don't even run the remote risk of sabotaging the entire game for the sake of doing so, because what are you preserving if the Canadian game is not distinctive?
Well, and I noticed too in the last week, now stories are coming out that the NFL is considering Canada could be a place of expansion for however many teams, and whether that's just a way of trying to take a kick at the XFL, because let's face it, the XFL has not gone well. What they get? They got 5 games in before the pandemic. Vince McMahon has lost his shirt in that venture, hence the sale to Dwayne Johnson and his partners to see if they can get something going. And they're even not definite that they're going to restart in 2022. So
this is the salvation. And
I'm not sure who's getting saved here, Rob. If it's us saving the XFL, the XFL saving the CFL, or we're just in a 3-ring circus and the dancing bears will be on in 20 minutes.
It's like they're reaching for a rope, but it's made out of spaghetti. And people say that, and I've heard it said so many times, that Dwayne Johnson and people have this immense base of followers and all this profile and all this expertise. Well, didn't Vince McMahon? He's an absolute titan, and he couldn't make it work twice. So yeah, this new group certainly has the credibility and the prominence that you would want, but that didn't help Vince McMahon. If Vince McMahon can't market something, maybe it's not marketable, because he's an absolute genius at that. He's taken something that isn't even technically a sport and made it a colossus. So if he couldn't take an actual sport as big as football is in the United States, and turn that into something. And granted, the pandemic did not help matters, but there was a pretty fragile foundation if that was enough to bring the whole thing down. Despite ratings, TV ratings south of the border that were pretty good. And I'm not sure what you're really building on. Now, I think both leagues have something they can offer each other if there's a way of extracting capitalizing upon some of the profile that Dwayne Johnson and associates have, some of their expertise, some of the cachet that goes along with having their names affiliated with yours, great. And if you're from an XFL standpoint, the CFL, for all its foibles, has existed, or Canadian professional football has existed for forever, and the XFL is now in its third incarnation, maybe. So the CFL has a staying power that the XFL would envy, and the XFL has the money that the CFL not only envies but requires. So maybe there's some grounds for a symbiosis there. If you're looking at the XFL and you're trying to think, okay, how can this be a game that people are going to embrace south of the border? The NFL is as successful as it is, has succeeded in spite of itself. What if they were to incorporate some of the CFL rules into the American game? Not necessarily going with 3 downs, but what about all the motion? What about a yard off the ball? What about some of the kicking rules? I mean, a punt can just be a bunch of players chasing after a ball rolling on the ground, or a fair catch. There's some things that they could take from the CFL game, turn the timing of the game, put that into American football. You could jazz up American football, and that might give them the oomph that they need, and also a distinctiveness from the NFL. That's where I think the XFL can use the Canadian expertise quite profitably. But I'm worried that the CFL is in such a financial pickle that they just might be desperate for any cash that they can get to sustain them. And if that is the case, if they're so dependent on that cash for survival, who knows what adaptations they'll make for the sheer sake of it. And if so, what's left of a game that we've loved for so long? Now, not enough of us have loved it in sufficient numbers for a sufficient duration. I don't pretend that the status quo is satisfactory, but I also don't think that they've been aggressive or proactive or innovative enough in marketing their game north of the border. They seem to pick out a globe and go like this and put a finger on a country and, okay, well, we'll try Antarctica, but without really concentrating their resources to see what can be done in Canada. That's where it should start. Last time I checked, it was the Canadian Football League. Sometimes I wonder.
It's the
whoever's noise. I'm going to turn my phone down.
We're popular right now.
We both have 2 nieces, so.
Oh, there we go. Well, I have a few more than that. These are great nieces, and so, but and I love seeing them. They are so cute. They were just born in July, so they're about 8 months old. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
One of my nieces is a Grey Cup baby. She was born the day of the 2005 Grey Cup.
Nice.
So
also, you'll never forget the date of that Grey Cup.
Absolutely.
That's excellent.
Abby is a beautiful girl, and she's almost 16.
Nice, very nice. Well, she might be watching Uncle Rob, seeing as they're out this week for classes.
Well, my youngest niece, my two nieces used to beat me up all the time, playfully. And one time I was on TV, and the younger niece, Erica, pointed at the TV and said, "There's our beat up uncle." So maybe
I like that.
What their reaction will be. Sorry for that tangent.
That's fine. No. That's what the show's all about. It's like we're just sitting, chatting sports. Today it's the CFL and whatever else happens to come up. So I'm good there. Don't need to apologize at all. But and it does worry me, Rob, that I'm hearing more about the league and its non-comments about its talks with the XFL than what I'm hearing about how are we going to manage to get a season in this year for 2021. And it's crickets out there. And that concerns me. You've got players in the States that will have to come back up to play with their teams, to honor their contracts. Well, they want to honor their contracts. They want to play. And so what are your rules going to be around that? How are you going to try to keep COVID away from the teams as they are traveling to play their games? And certainly we've seen Major League Baseball has not been successful keeping COVID cases out. I mean, they had COVID cases before this season even started. We've seen the Montreal Canadiens have a COVID case, and Yoel Armia has not returned yet. We've seen the Brazil variant in BC has absolutely decimated Vancouver Canucks. I think they're up to 26 cases. And the latest talk I'm reading is that they may not play another game this season. So no idea what Gary Bettman's plans might be for how you're going to handle the games that the other teams in the North aren't going to be able to play against them, because that it is going to have an impact on the standings. And what about the teams that have finished their season series with the Canucks so that it's fair? I mean, these are all the things that you have to take into consideration to come up with your game plan as to how you're going to make a season happen. And I truly believe the season has to happen this year for the CFL to have any viability down the road. You know, you got Montreal Alouette owners. They've owned the team for a year now, and they haven't been able to host a game or have their team play. They've had no chance to make revenue. The Toronto Argonauts, we know the move to BMO Field has not put more butts in the seats. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers have just come out saying they lost $7 million this year, or last year rather, excuse me, for not having a season. We know that we're not bleeding black in Regina with the Rough Riders. I mean, every team has hurt. And now, no more talk about Halifax. And how could we get a team on the East Coast and make it work? Now, nothing happening there. And all of those things are a concern for me as to whether we are going to have a kickoff this season.
And that's to a point, Linda, I'm wondering whether the league strategically released the thing about the XFL as a bit of a red herring to distract people from obsessing about, are they going to play this year? Mm-hmm. And a year ago at this time, as bad as things have been and are in Canada, I think we looked at the United States and said, oh, thank goodness we live in Canada, not the States. Look what a mess they're making of it down there. But now I see 11,000 people at baseball games or a packed stadium in Texas, and I see the United States opening up and sports looking a lot more like sports as we remember them in the United States. And yet, look what's happening with the Vancouver Canucks, and look what's happening with the variants in BC. And I mean, welcome to Regina. Yes. Just the variants running what might, I've lost 2 friends to COVID, and now someone very close to me has COVID. And this is getting worse at a time when I thought things were going to get better. And we've got the race between the virus and the vaccine, and it's not as lopsided as one had hoped. So, and now we're a week from mid-April, and training camp training camps were to begin in May. Mm-hmm. I don't think the vaccine is turning out to be the panacea that everybody thought it was going to be. And how do you proceed with a season? There's no way on earth it can begin on time. Even if it's delayed, at what point can you feel comfortable with fans going to games? And they're so much more gate dependent than the leagues that are now admitting fans. So is it even feasible to think that this can happen, period? And yeah. Even if it does, they're in a situation where if you play, you're going to lose money. If you don't play, you'll probably lose more. Plus, you lose that presence. So it's kind of, do you want to get hit by a Volkswagen or get hit by a truck? You're still going to get hit by something. And so even if they play, there's going to be damage financially. It's just a matter of scale. I think they've got to get themselves out there. If you're gone for 2 years, what infrastructure do you have left when you try to rebuild? you pretty much have to let everybody go and get on with their lives, don't you? And you can't just keep paying salaries for nothing.
Yeah.
So I think there's the imperative of playing this year. Maybe you could revive it a couple of years, but next year, but you'd have to start from virtual scratch. What are you going to have left? And you've lost 2 years of that presence, and you're way further behind than you would have been even if you're starting in September this year. But I'm becoming increasingly doubtful we're even going to see that through no fault of the Canadian football leagues. I think it's almost unfair to put the onus on them to, give us a schedule, give us that. We don't know what the COVID numbers are going to be tomorrow, let alone in May. We don't know what the situation is going to be. I think in January, or when they're not starting to announce the vaccine rollout situation or schedule, I think it was as bad as it was, you could pretty comfortably say, okay, by May, we're going to be in a lot better place. Here we are with most of the snow gone, and we still don't know. And these variants are so unpredictable. And so the transmissibility of that is so worrisome. And so what is the prospect of a season? I would have said 90-10 in favor of there being something a few months ago. Now I'm wondering if 50-50 is a little optimistic.
And it might be.
I don't know what they can do.
No, and you raised some good points. I think what I would have liked is just to have an idea. Give me that you've got a couple of scenarios that you're contemplating, that you are serious about if the stars align, and that's almost what it has to be with COVID. I mean, Ontario's being hit so hard again with the third wave, as is Quebec, and they're locking everything down. And I think Doug Ford's going around the province right now in Ontario putting padlocks on everybody's door to try to slow up the transmission and stop it if you can, as they're, again, everybody's trying to roll out the vaccine as fast as they can, but you can only do so much with the dosages that you're being given. So I think I just want to know that, that you've got something in mind to try and do it. And maybe they have to revive the bubble idea. Last year, they were thinking about, okay, everybody move to Winnipeg and we'll play some games there, because I'll tell you, kudos to the WHL, because right now, at least here in Saskatchewan, the bubble in Regina, with all the new problems that Regina keeps facing every day, Rob, not one case yet, and I'll knock wood that I'm not jinxing them, but they've done a tremendous job protecting those players and staff and everybody else taking part in those games. So maybe that's what needs to be looked at. And I noticed that I haven't had a chance to read it, but there's a column today talking about that maybe the NHL needs to think about bubbling with the Vancouver situation, that this isn't looking good for, can you just keep teams traveling from place to place and going to play their games?
I think they got to go with a playoff bubble again. It worked so well last year. Why risk it with your showcase period? And players have demonstrated that it can work, and that they will do it for not a short term, because the playoffs go on forever. But yeah, I mean, the CFL was willing to do that starting last September. Obviously, funding was the issue. They're going to need $30 million or thereabouts. If they were willing to do it last year, I think the difference this year will be they weren't willing to pay what it took to do it. They were hoping for the government bailout. Now I think even if they don't get a cent of support from any other levels, they've got to find a way to do it, and they got to bite that bullet, because the costs of not spending that money are immense, unpredictable. But I think they got to get themselves out there, and the perception becomes an issue, and profile, and people's attention spans are so short now that if you're not constantly in their face, you disappear. And
and that's where
there's enough to watch. I mean, look now. Even, I mean, NHL is rolling, basketball is rolling, baseball season's rolling. We've had an NFL season. We haven't had the CFL, and there's certainly enough sports to watch now. But what are we missing? That one league that's become so near and dear to our hearts. And rewinding to the start, I think one of the things that has allowed it to become near and dear to our hearts is the fact that it's been accessible and it's been relatable. And I think a lot of that goes back to the Canadian model that I hope they're not too desperate or anxious to modify.
Well, the one modification I would like to see, and you raised it in your one column, is I want more Canadian players playing in the Canadian Football League. It disturbs me when the player talks come up for an agreement between the CFLPA and the CFL, that the talk of, well, we'd like to add a few more Americans and reduce the number of Canadians. And my response is the same every time. No, we have a fabulous system. The junior football, university football across this country is fantastic. And, you know, you look at our two programs here in the province with the Huskies and the Rams, and then look at junior football with the Thunder and the Hilltops here. And you have got some excellent players that I think they should be getting those opportunities to at least try out. And can we please have a Canadian quarterback? Stop telling us that Canadian quarterbacks can't play our game.
And where it's evolved now is that just the so-called Canadians at so-called skilled positions aren't as prevalent. Even when a Canadian is a receiver, they'll just put him out on the wide side and just say, get out of the way. We're playing 11-man football, and this guy he might as well be just in the stands or asking a vendor for some peanuts because he's so far removed from the game. So, whereas once upon a time, you look at the Canadian receivers, and I could rattle off 30 names of great Canadian receivers. You know, everybody from Jim Young to Whit Tucker to Terry Evanson to Peter Della Riva to Ray Algard to Jeff Fairholm. Look at the game now. I don't think Canadians no longer have the talent to play receiver. I think they no longer have the opportunity. There's a few. There's Brad Sinopoli. There's Lamar Durant. But by and large, the Canadian receivers have become marginalized or virtually non-existent. And now there are worries that that's going to change and get even worse. Well, it's been proven that the Canadian system, and even with the cooperation of the United States college system, can produce amazing receivers. But the system as it exists now really doesn't give them that opportunity. And so it's not just quarterbacks. It's you're looking at it from a receiver standpoint. There's outliers. You look at what Andrew Harris, as a Canadian, has been able to do as a running back in Winnipeg. You look what John Cornish did in Calgary. But you wonder too how many Andrew Harrises or John Cornishes there could have been if the attitudes hadn't been so ingrained as far as we've got to have an American at running back. And because your general managers are predominantly American, because your coaches, not only head coaches, but assistant coaches are predominantly American, there's going to be that institutional, I think, deference to the Americans. And that's an undeniably huge talent base, and the training base and the infrastructure that they have down there from that is amazing. Like there are players who've come up here and looked at, I remember them looking at Taylor Field and saying, I had a better stadium than that in high school. And especially they came from Texas, and you've got paid high school head coaches in the United States, whereas here they're volunteers, and the American college, not just at the tier 1 level, but the Division 3 level, they've got a scroll-like list of coaches and facilities that a lot of CFL teams would envy. So the players can benefit from that. But a lot of those are Canadian players. An increasing number of those are Canadian players who are going down to the States. And there's 19 or 20 Canadians in the NFL right now. So yeah, the NFL is poaching players who once upon a time would have been playing Canadian football. And that's undeniably a factor. But I think that pool is being replenished, if not entirely, but to a significant degree by the ever-improving developmental system that has existed for Canadians. But it's not reflected in the composition of the rosters, and who knows where this is going.
Well, you mentioned Brad Sinopoli, and Brad Sinopoli was a top university quarterback at the University of Ottawa, but had to switch over to receiver, and certainly he's done a tremendous job of doing that. And I'm going to go way back, Rob, before you might have been truly completely aware of the CFL, but I'm going to go back to guys that I can remember playing university football. Jamie Bone, who used to do the analysis on university games, never got a chance. His backup, who became a starter when he left, Phil Ford, was another tremendous quarterback at Western Ontario, as was his brother Mike. Moving up here, what about Darrell Leeson having a chance? Ben Chapdelaine, who played for the McMaster Marauders, was also a really good quarterback. And, you know, bring it further up, Brent Schneider from the Huskies. You know, and there's, you know, I'm, you know, going from way in the past to now, and you know, it's frustrating. You know, when I see these guys and see what a tremendous talent they are, and give them a fair shot. If they get beaten out, fair enough.
And for the longest time, it was actually the circumstances were skewed against them because there was no roster incentive to play the Canadians, because it doesn't exist now. But before, it was, until recently, it was you dress 3 quarterbacks regardless of nationality. So when the Riders gave Brandon Bridge extensive playing time in 2017 and 2018, that didn't count against the ratio. So where's the incentive? They've changed that, but how many Canadian quarterbacks have paid dearly for the rules being skewed against them? In the Canadian Football League, when we haven't had a Canadian quarterback of any permanency since Russ Jackson, there's no advantage to be derived. And I mean, the systems in the States are way more sophisticated in terms of the coaching they're getting from high school, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't have an opportunity to work with that raw material if there's no incentive to actually have a Canadian quarterback. And we've been talking about this. I started following Canadian football closely not long after Russ Jackson retired in 1969. So I've never seen a Canadian quarterback who's really been impactful. Jerry D'Attilio in 1980 was named the East's most outstanding Canadian, but that didn't have a lot of staying power. And Greg Vavra in Calgary played a little bit. And I mentioned Brandon Bridge. So there's been this spasms of, Julio Caravata played a little in BC. There have been spasms of Canadian quarterbacks being used, but that's the extent of it. And but I think it's gone now to the point where it's a larger issue than just quarterbacks. What has happened to the Ray Algards, the Jeff Fairholms, the Joe Poplawskis, the Rick Houses, Jim Young, et cetera, et cetera. Vince Danielson, Dave Sapunjas, Gerald Wilcox, Tony Gabriel. They're virtually gone in terms of an impactful Canadian receivers. Not just the quarterbacks who are getting shuffled off to the side now. It's receivers. And they used to be plentiful and productive, and they're virtually gone.
We have a question from Richard Haubrick here, Rob. He says, in regards to the development leagues, junior and CIS, they've lost at least 1 year. Is the development of Canadian talent in jeopardy for football as well? That's a great question. What do you think?
Especially, it's such a short season to begin with. High school's lost that season too, and those seasons are generally 7 or 8 games. Junior is 8 games. U Sports is 8 games. It's a pretty small window as it is. It's not even half the length of a CFL schedule. And then when that is gone, looking from the CFL standpoint, how do you draft players when you just haven't had that already insufficient body of evidence to look at and say, okay, this is why we want this player. They lost a year at a pretty crucial point in their careers. I hope it's not 2 years. We really don't know. What is it going to look like by September? I don't know what it's going to look like in May. And especially with it being a contact sport, there's not a lot of social distancing in football. There was when I played defensive back, because the receivers would usually beat me by way more than 6 yards, or 6 meters, 6 feet. I blew the joke, but football is just not at all compatible with social distancing. So you could, if it was tennis, great, but a sport that is such a collision contact sport, that might be the last sport that's able to look anything like normal.
But yet the NFL managed
of testing 40, 50 players as opposed to a basketball team or a hockey team.
But the NFL did start getting some fans in to watch the games later in the season. There were a few thousand and social distance. NBA has started allowing a certain number of fans in for those games, and it's been left up to the teams to decide when they would start doing that. And I don't know what the mechanism was that was put in place as to, I guess it's first come, first serve. Whoever can snag a ticket. But the team said, yeah, we're allowing fans in now. So I still think you could find a way to start the season at some point, even if it's shortened, Rob. I think September makes the most sense to just wait until the fall when we've had more of a chance to get people vaccinated. And no, you don't fill the stadium up. I'm wondering when we'll start hearing the stories coming out of Texas for those 30,000 fans that went to the Rangers baseball game. And President Joe Biden did not go to that game to throw out the opening pitch. He refused to attend because of them allowing all those fans in and no social distancing, which, that's a important stance that he has taken. We'll see what happens in the games today as to what they do with the fan base, what Major League Baseball says about it. So, it is possible to, again, I know they're not going to make money this year, and I appreciate that. But again, that presence, I think that presence is so important so people don't find other things to do to fill their time. Oh, and that's a commentary from one of my heard but not seen co-hosts. Deanna and Lefty Munster like to chime in every now and then. I think Deanna was in agreement that she wants CFL games this year, even though she has no idea what this is.
No, it just every time I drive by the stadium, it amazes me that so much went into building a stadium that's now at least momentarily obsolete. $278 million, and everything we thought it would represent at this point, and now it just sits here idle. And it's a monument to. I almost feel like it's like you driving by a Roman Colosseum right now. It's just sitting there, but there's nothing you can do with it. And yet it's this beautiful state-of-the-art edifice that nobody can really use. And I drive by it every night going to a Western Hockey League game, and it's hard to believe that we're even speculating that there'll be a season. But I just don't think. I mean, looking at it now, I just really wonder. I thought there were a lot more grounds for optimism, but it's waning. Somehow this league is going to have to come up with the money to go it alone, and because if the federal government wasn't going to come through with the money last year, why would they this year? And
there's no reason for them to, in my mind, either.
Now, if they were to be a stauncher proponent of Canadian football, if the CFL were to be a stauncher component of Canadian football, maybe so. It's a little audacious to in a league where 17 of the 24 starters are American, to say, "Hey, Canadian government, bail us out." Now, if they were to take some progressive steps to being more amenable to giving Canadians positions of prominence, and not just having most of them be offensive linemen, maybe that symbolic step would attract some attention from the federal government. But the CFL is currently constituted. As much as I love the Canadian Football League, and will always love the Canadian Football League, I didn't quibble 1 second with the federal government's spurning of that request, because logically it had no basis.
Well, we never got a good explanation from Randy Ambrosi. Again, we
never do.
As to what exactly the proposal was, why that amount of money, how exactly were they going to spend it, and I think the CFL does a terrible job marketing itself. One of the great promos, and I've always loved this one, was when they were trying to get people watching the CFL. And you remember this one, the one about our balls are bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was brilliant. I giggled myself, off my chair every time I was going to say something else, but I thought maybe I'd better not so I don't get kicked off air. But I thought those were great promos, having some fun, but it certainly got your attention. And They need to market. You don't
But they've got to
market.
drill down deep, Linda, and
Yeah.
something. It's one thing to buy ads and to do all those things, and that's part of it. They're limited by the resources they have to do that now. They can't pretend to be Nike or McDonald's or Coke. They need some freebies. And they're lucky in that they have a great benefactor in TSN that could give them lots of exposure. And I think there's more TSN could do as well in terms of the CFL related programming they provide. And the CFL is so often buried on SportsCenter behind Maple Leafs exhibition highlights or Major League Soccer. And the CFL is the TSN's big property now that they no longer have the national hockey rights. And they've got amazing people like Dave Naylor and Farhan Lalji use them. Here in Regina, Claire Hanna, Claire Hanna.
Yes, Sarah Oleski in Winnipeg.
Sarah Oleski. I mean, you've got these amazing reporters. Why aren't they being used? And go right to the grassroots and get players on the phone with people who haven't renewed season tickets, or even those who have or once had them years ago. You can't go to sports dinners and you can't meet up with the players directly anymore, but there's an army of players, especially the ones who are from Canada. Get them on the phone with people, have them think of ways for them to interact and sell your tickets, sell your game, one call at a time, one interaction at a time. That's how you rebuild. And you rebuild with a base. Right now they're neglecting what should be the most fundamental base that there is. And there's a lot of things they can do that wouldn't cost them a cent. It would cost them some time, but it wouldn't cost them a cent to get their name out there, their word out there, and their message out there. And that's what's not being done. And it's boots on the ground interactions and marketing. And don't say that you've done all you can in Canada, because it's obvious that they haven't. And that takes initiative. And I don't even think it takes an innovative nature, because there's a lot of things that were done 30 and 40 years ago that made the Saskatchewan Roughriders a success that were just grassroots oriented interactions with fans. And I think the Rough Riders can do a better job of that. And I think across the league, a much better job can be done of that. The Riders close one practice a week. That might not seem like a big deal, but you're basically saying you've got a publicly owned facility and you can't go into it to watch your community-owned team. And things like that. Turn that around. Say, okay, not only are all our practices open to the public, but we're gonna have autograph sessions after every practice. Today it'll be the receivers. Tomorrow it'll be the running backs. It'll be the offensive linemen. Come out to practice and you can meet the players, not just once a year on Labor Day weekend where the lineups are so uncontrollable. You're probably not going to meet the players or spend the kind of time that you want with them every day, every market, every year, every team. Once you feel like you're watching a friend of yours play football, you might be bringing friends of yours to watch them play football. That's how you do it. That's the basic. It's not going to happen overnight. They're looking for these magic solutions. I think they're just overlooking the necessity of rolling up their sleeves and doing it. And that's how you win people over. The accessibility that is afforded by the Canadian Football League, and not as embraced to the extent that it once was, is still an option for them if they choose to capitalize upon it. If you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, you probably grew up watching Terry Bradshaw and Lynn Swann and and John Stallworth and Joe Green and Jack Ham and everybody. But if you were living in Pittsburgh, especially now, if you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan now, what are your chances of meeting Juju Smith-Schuster or Ben Roethlisberger? Probably virtually nil. Especially Roethlisberger. If you're a Rough Rider fan, you want to meet Cody Fajardo, you can go to practice and he'll probably initiate the conversation. They've got a gem in Cody Fajardo. The league's got those gems all over the place. Use them. They're your biggest resource.
Yeah. Well, Cody, you just go to the exhibition in Regina, Rob, and go to the corn dog stand, and chances are you could find Cody there. I thought that was great thing that happened. And you'd never see an NFL player at a county fair.
No,
but him there
that's
and
where
chatting.
the CFL can really capitalize.
Yeah.
And that's how you win people over. I mean, when I was 7 years old, I went to the airport to meet Ron Lancaster after a game in Winnipeg. Got his autograph. I was like, oh my goodness. I thought differently about the Canadian Football League after I got the autographs of Ron Lancaster, John Steele, and Silas McKinney at the airport. That elevated my interest to another tier. I was absolutely football mad by 1981. And one day I heard it announced that Joey Walters, who was in a spectacular slot back with the Rough Riders, he was going to be making an appearance at the Golden Mile Shopping Center. So I thought I'd like to meet Joey Walters. So I walked over there. It wasn't too far from where I lived in Whitmore Park. And Joey was standing by an ice cream stand in the mall just by himself. So I went over, introduced myself, talked to him for 45 minutes, and then he apologized for taking so much of my time. Before a week was out, I'd gone to a sporting goods store and bought a green and white jersey with 17 Walters on the back. Yep. And that's the Joey Walters thing can still work. And it still does work. Look how people love Cody Fajardo. Look how people loved Weston Dressler. How much will people love them if you make them even more accessible to the people than they already are? By not closing practices and by just doing everything you can to get them out there. Yeah, there's a fundamental business of preparing for games, but you've also got to remember that they're your biggest marketing army. And if you've got that built-in marketing army all year in the form of not only Canadians who are on the team, but are prominent members of the team, you've got that all year. It's not just a seasonal thing. And that's how you rebuild it from the ground up. And you may have to tear it down a bit to build it, because not unlike so many other businesses that are struggling during COVID. Maybe you have to scale down. That doesn't mean you have aspirations to be a smaller scale operation. It means you're realistic and you're pragmatic, and you concentrate on the absolute guts and from soup to nuts of what you're doing, and you rebuild it with a one-on-one, one customer at a time, one game at a time mentality that football coaches and players like to espouse. In football, it's one game at a time. With rebuilding your product, it's one fan, one interaction, one autograph at a time, one selfie. That's how you do it.
Well, yeah, no, and you're absolutely right, Rob. It's a keep it simple. Go do the basics that you need to do, and we'll see. Hopefully, somebody has been paying attention to us this afternoon, and I'm going to let you go back to your writing. I'm sure you have a column that you're trying to put together here, and I so appreciate your time today to talk about this and your insight into what may or may not be happening here. And I hope that we'll get a chance to chat again on the show to talk more, hopefully, what positive things happening with the CFL, or perhaps a little baseball, a little Montreal Expos.
Oh, yes, please. I would love to chat Expos, and I would love to see that become a reality again. That's I cry a little every day when I see a Washington Nationals score. So
I can't even look at the scores for that, seeing their name on it.
It's Gary Carter's birthday today. Gary Carter would have been 67 years old today.
That's right. So. Yeah, wonderful man. So we're going to wrap it up here, folks. Appreciate you sticking with me through all of this. But as you can tell, Rob and I are extremely passionate about the CFL and all things associated with it. And yes, the Budgies are certainly wanting to see a season and not happy with the state of the cone of silence happening right now. So maybe I can get Randy Ambrosi to come on and talk to me. We'll give that a shot. But Rob, thanks so much. Have a great rest of the day. And for everyone for tuning in, Richard Hobart, for your question, thank you so much. Everybody have a tremendous day, and go Expos go.
Go Expos.